Shalom. Thanks for joining me. Ecclesiastes 3 starts off by saying, to everything there is a season and a time for every purpose under the heaven, a time to be born and a time to die. Now, in the life of a parent, you always come to a point if you have children, when to take your children to funerals. All right. And let me just start off saying that this story took place in a time period when I was not a Torah keeper, because some of the things that were done in this story, I would not have done because of in Numbers 19, where it does tell us that being in the presence of a dead body that would be unclean for 7 days and some other things like that. So if you're a Torah keeper, you know, so I just want to let you know ahead of time what's coming up. All right. So there was a point where we had to decide when to take our children to funerals, and we had two children, Winston and Zoe. And sometimes the decision is made for you if the deceased person is a really close relative, and the child needs to go in order to get closure. You know, say if it's your spouse or the child's grandmother, grandfather, or something like that, or a close uncle. Sometimes the choice to take the child to a funeral is optional. The deceased is not related, and there's no close ties with the children. However, eventually a close relative will die, and the children need to be prepared to deal with death. In our families, the scripture dictates the parameters of the hereafter and the state of the dead. But I was apprehensive about dealing with my children's emotions of standing in front of the casket. I have been protecting them from what I perceived as the dead body trauma. All right. So I did not take them to funerals of non relatives and even some funerals. My mom kept telling me I was wrong to shelter them because they were 5 and 6 years of age and death was a part of life. Now, she was correct about that. Death is a part of life. Well, Floyd's brother, David, died, and I felt I had to take them to the funeral because my mom and Floyd's mom would have been so distraught if I had kept Winston's away home. So I girded up my loins and prepared to get them ready for the dead body. All right. So I sat Winston and Zoe on the couch. We were living in Michigan at the time, in the living room, and went over all the basic facts that we had discussed in our homeschool Bible class about life and death. We talked about how the dead know nothing, see nothing, and are waiting in the grave for the resurrection. I explained that when Yeshua returns for the righteous, we would all get new bodies. I described the funeral home with the separate rooms they had for each family to view their dead loved ones, and there would be chairs, and the casket would be up in the front of the room. I described the funeral procedure from the family coming in to the closing of the casket, the people leaving the funeral home, and I didn't dare explain that Uncle David was going to be cremated. I just, at that point, I just couldn't deal with the questions and the horror that I thought Winston and Zoe would have. Okay. They seemed to understand the funeral process. They asked a few questions that had nothing to do with the dead body. And I was surprised that they were so calm and collected about the whole thing. I told them if you had more questions, you to come to me and ask. So about 15 minutes later, Winston came back in the room. He said, Ma, I have a question. I said, okay, what is it? He said, where do they put the little box? What little box? He said, the box with the head in it. I said, what? I was perplexed. And Winston looked at me and was puzzled at my expression. You said when Yeshua returns, we get a new body. So where do they put the box with the head in it? I said, okay, okay. So I went back to the drawing board on that one. Okay. So we made it through David's funeral with no emotional problems. Okay. Now, some background on Winston and Zoe is needed before I can continue with this story. Okay. Winston, very cautious, very prim. He will run from blood and gore and any unpleasant smells. He don't want to have nothing to do with it. And it took him some years to get the courage to pick up and rub the little barn cats, the kittens and stuff. He's afraid of getting dirty or getting scratched. Okay, now the complete opposite, Zoe, fearless and not in the least bit squeamish. When she was 8, I was at the sink preparing food when she walked into the kitchen. I didn't turn to look at her, but she began to moan as she came right up to me and said, "Oh, Mama, look, the kitty is dead." I turned around and she was holding a very dead kitten in her bare hands. Okay. I was a startled. Immediately went into a double role. My first role was to nurture my child, because her kitten was dead. But the second was the overseer of the house sanitation. Okay. So we dealt with that. Now, when she was 11, she watched with interest. Our goat that we had was in labor. And when the labor persisted overnight and there was no kid in sight, I decided that we should go in and help it out, help the kid to get out. And Zoe was raring to go. Floyd wanted no parts of it, and Winston was forced to be present just in case we needed a runner for supplies or a call to the vet. All right. I explained the procedure I had seen 3 times. Okay. The first time I was watching James Harriet television program, All Creatures Great and Small, deliver a calf. The second time was at the county fair in Michigan when 2 guys assisted a calf being born, and they had to actually do ropes and stuff because the legs got tangled up to pull them out. The third time was when a lady brought a laboring goat to the vet's office in Michigan, and we were there. And the vet took the goat outside, put on some long gloves that came all the way up to her shoulders, and put her hand and arm into the vaginal opening and brought out the kid. And Zoe, eyes and my eyes were riveted to the scene. All right. Winston, he told me as soon as he saw the vet put on the gloves, he turned away. He didn't want to see nothing. Okay. However, based on these vicarious experiences, I believed I was ready. Okay, more than ready. We just and happened to have some long vet gloves from applying medication to a dog that had mange. And so Zoe had been listening to my explanation of the procedure, and she was all excited. And so she said, "Okay, do you want to go inside, or shall I do it?" So since I had more experience, I elected to go inside while she held the goat. We delivered a beautiful little billy goat. When the nanny didn't pass the afterbirth, we called the vet, and he said that the kid and the nanny were fine. But sadly, the nanny's milk wouldn't come as needed, and we tried supplements and enlisting a friend to help us to try to milk the nanny. However, the little Billy died on the fourth day. But you get the picture of the temperaments of Winston and Zoe. Now, back to the main story. There were 2 more funerals of relatives that Winston and Zoe attended. They had no immediate or delayed emotional trauma. I even escalated the experience by asking them to touch the bodies. Okay, now you Torah people, I know you're freaking now. Okay, I am too looking back at this, but we did because we didn't know anything about that. We were I think United Brethren or something like that, but they don't have no problem. They bring bodies into the church. So, but it was no problem for Zoe, but Winston had to meet about 3 or 4 dead bodies before he would go touch one. Okay, I believe he did touch his Granny Shirley's hands. That's Floyd's mom, at her funeral. So I figured I would take them to some of the viewing and the wakes of people I know. Um, but Winston and Zoe, didn't know. Now, I did this for convenience because Floyd worked a part-time job in the evenings, and often these wakes were in the evenings, and I didn't want to leave Winston and Zoe alone at home. And to me, it didn't make any sense to hunt down a babysitter for 1 hour. And we lived out in the country, and finding a sitter with a car to come to our farm was always a challenge. So we didn't have many babysitters. So I give you a little contextual information on the community. It was a small community in Michigan. We were about 75 feet from the Michigan Ohio border, and very country town. Okay. And a friend of mine, uncle died, and most people I knew lived on either small farms, or if they lived in the city, they had relatives that lived on farms around in the area, and there was a lot of families that kind of stayed in the area. Okay, so a friend of mine's uncle died, and I was invited to the wake in Fayette, Ohio. So, and it's a small rural village, is what it is. And actually, Fayette was closer to our house than the town of Morenci, which was in Michigan. I was closer to Ohio border. So I went to the wake with Winston and Zoe, and the deceased was an elderly gentleman. He looked to be in his 80s, And when we walked into the funeral home, there were 40, 50 people that were present there. Most of them were sitting in chairs, kind of lined up with the body up front. I knew some of them from church and the recreational activities, with Winston and Zoe. And when we entered the viewing room, I stopped to sign the guest book. And Winston and Zoe, by now they had no shy bones in either of their bodies dealing with dead people. So they went directly to the casket to the man that they had never met. And I finished signing the book and turned to join them. My horror. They both had their hands in the coffin. And as I got near, I saw that they were poking at the pimples on the man's face. And he was covered with protruding nodules, And I quickly got them to stop and turned around slowly to see if anybody had seen him. Luckily, there was no one else standing near the casket. Because I think I would, the expression died of embarrassment. But, sometime later I asked, once I said, why are y'all poking at the man? And he said, we just want to see if those bumps on his face will go down. Okay. So I chose to see this behavior as curiosity in budding scientists. Okay. I know that some others, y'all may see this as a lack in my parenting skills. All right. But however, I did accomplish my goal. They were not afraid of dead bodies. Thank you for joining me today. And please like and share and subscribe if you haven't already. Shalom.